Be very still. You could miss it. Let's talk about it on Key Life.
Key Life is a program for struggling believers who are sick of phony religion and pious cliches. Our host and teacher is seminary professor Steve Brown. He teaches that radical freedom leads to infectious joy and surprising faithfulness.
Thanks, Eric. If you were listening yesterday, we're involved in some side roads. Now, the main thrust, and we're going to spend a lot of time, maybe beginning today and certainly tomorrow and into next week, has to do with a life worth living and what Jesus said about living that is so profound and so important that it'll change your life even if you're ordained. But before we're doing that, we're going down side roads, and yesterday we talked about how that which is trivial at the time may be momentous in reality. In John 12:23, Jesus said, "The hour's come for the Son of Man to be glorified." And that you miss if you haven't been listening to the rest of John. Throughout the Gospel of John, in John 7:6, 2:4, 7:8, 7:30, 8:20, Jesus says over and over and over again, "My hour has not yet come." And yet here, in front of the Greeks and the disciples, when the Greeks are brought to him, and he looks over their shoulders at a hill in the shape of a skull where he would die, he says, "It's time." Now that seems trivial. Seems like, there were Greeks all over the place, and Jesus was spending time with them. Big deal. You can miss it if you're not very careful. The coming of the Greek Gentiles and their interest in Jesus and his salvation in the mark of transition was the time when Jesus was glorified. If you had been there, you would have missed it. I know. If I'd have been there, I would have missed it too. It's just too trivial. It wasn't important enough. I suppose that later on, not even mentioned by the other gospel writers, Matthew would be asked, "Hey, Matt, do you remember the time the Greeks came to Jesus?" He would have said, "I'm not sure. Refresh my memory. I don't think I remember." But John remembered. And he saw in this seemingly trivial event something of utmost importance. Let me tell you a secret. Just before God does something big, he doesn't sound a trumpet. A voice doesn't come from the heavens and echo and say, "This is it. Pay attention." It's very important. Because God doesn't do that, many people miss seeing that which is of utmost importance. I was listening to the testimony of a pastor who has been instrumental in leading a whole lot of people to Christ. He said he had gone to college for only 1 year and dropped out. He started traveling around the world. He said he ended up in Africa, and he was high on drugs. And with a terrible hangover, he realized that he simply had not found anything in his life of any importance. And then he remembered back to that 1 year in college, a girl that he had dated only 2 times, and she was a Christian. She was the only person, he said, I ever knew who really knew him. And he said with his hangover, his head exploding, he bowed his head and he prayed, "God, I don't know you. I don't even know enough to pray to you. But Beth knew you, and I invite you to come into my life right now." Oh. When Beth told him about Jesus, she didn't think it was any big deal. I mean, she didn't make that the center of her life. There was no trumpet. But at that moment, she was doing something really important. You remember last night when your son asked you about God and you thought it was just a trivial question? Be careful. Don't expect the trumpets. The business friend with whom you had lunch last week, that may have been more important than you think for the kingdom of God. The Sunday school class that you teach, and you can't even keep the kids quiet. They're always running around. No trumpets, but that may be very important. Don't be fooled because you don't hear the trumpets. There was a cartoon a number of years ago that pictured a scene that took place in 1861 when two men, or the 1800s, when two men are talking about Springfield. One asks the other, anything new happening around here? And he replies, no, nothing. There was a new baby born in the Lincoln cabin, but nothing else, nothing much ever happens around here. Let me say something. The trivializing of life is an abomination to God. If he's in charge of all the circumstances of your life, then be sensitive to what he's doing. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do tomorrow. We're going to start looking at what Jesus said about life. And it's really profound, and I can hardly wait to tell you about it. But today, make it your prayer. Lord, since there aren't any trumpets, and since I'm such a dummy sometimes, make me sensitive when you're moving. May I hear the soft sound of sandaled feet. You think about that. Amen.
Thanks, Steve. On Key Life tomorrow, more teaching from the Gospel of John. Steve just talked about being sensitive to God's leading. When he does make us aware that he's working to draw someone to himself, we can actually get in the way of what God's doing with our silly ideas about how to share our faith. We have a free CD for you titled The Death of Evangelism. On this CD, Steve talks about how we need to throw out everything that we think we know about evangelism and see the real deal. Here's a segment from that CD, and then I'll be back to let you know how you can get the whole thing free.
In the 12th chapter of John, Jesus says an amazing thing. He says this, if I be lifted up, I'll draw everybody, all people to myself. Last time I noticed that hadn't happened, and there's some answers for why it hasn't happened. Maybe Jesus was wrong, which is highly unlikely. Or maybe we're doing it wrong, do you think? And so this morning, we're going to talk about doing it right, and it's very important you throw out everything you've learned about evangelism. Mae West said to one of her enemies, your mother should have kept the stork and thrown you away. Well, keep Jesus, but throw everything else away. How come it's not happening? How come everybody isn't in this church or a church like this in this city? How come everybody's not been drawn to Jesus who was lifted up? Well, let me tell you, the first thing you ought to know is that evangelism dies, and it doesn't work when we forget what evangelism really is. Please note the text. The text says that we have to work at being new creatures. Doesn't say that. It says you got to pray a lot and read the Bible and go to church and be spiritual and smile so you don't hurt your witness so you can be a new creature. No, it doesn't say that. It says this, it says you are a new creature. As Christians, we have to learn the difference between petition and praise. Petition is when you ask for money. Petition is when you ask for healing. Petition is when you ask that your marriage be healthy or that you find a wife or a husband. Praise is something you already got. You are, did you ever think about this? You are a new creation. You can't change that. That's what you are. Please note we're a new creation. And please note in the text that the Apostle Paul says, not counting their former sins against them. No, it doesn't say that. There's no former in there. Are you crazy? D.T. Niles said we're beggars, telling other beggars where we found bread. But we don't believe that. We think we're former beggars, telling people who are beggars where they could find bread. We think, we like to say, well, we know some former beggars, and we used to be good friends with them. You don't have to be a beggar anymore, because we're going to tell you how you don't have to be a beggar. Or we say, of course, we're not beggars, never have been, but we don't want you to be, so we're going to don't do that. We are beggars now, extremely needy, extremely sinful, telling other beggars who's got the bread. That's what evangelism is. And it's so, now let me tell you a principle. The principle is this: there is a direct correlation between people seeing Jesus and you taking off your mask. You know what they're like? You. Some of them are as ugly as you are. We don't even know their names. Some of them are as good looking as you are. Some of them got money. Some of them are poor. Some dress nicely. Some don't dress nicely. Some are needy. Some are lonely, like us. Some are afraid, like us. And we don't go as a former beggar. We go as needy people and show up. And that's what evangelism is.
That's just a bit of the good stuff that you'll get on this free CD, The Death of Evangelism. Christians have been so loaded down with guilt about this topic, and this message will help set you free to joyfully share the message of God's grace in surprising ways. Call 1-800-KEY-LIFE, that's 1-800-539-5433, and ask for the free CD from Steve titled The Death of Evangelism, and we'll get it in the mail. Or mail your request to Key Life Network, Post Office Box 5000, Maitland, Florida, 32794. If you're in Canada, mail Key Life Canada, Post Office Box 28060, Waterloo, Ontario, N2L 6J8. Or email steve@keylife.org and ask for the CD, The Death of Evangelism. Really is free, but we do need your help changing lives with the good news of God's grace. You can charge a gift on your credit card or include a gift in your envelope when you request that free CD. Thanks so much. Key Life is a listener-supported production of Key Life Network.